Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. So welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So before we start today's discussion, we have a very important announcement which is related to an article found on page number 10 of the Hindu newspaper. According to the article, Manipur state government has agreed along with the UPSC to make special arrangements for students from Manipur, particularly from the hill districts of Manipur, which has witnessed large-scale ethnic violence over the last 1 year. Because of the ethnic violence in Manipur, UPSC had expressed its inability to conduct examination in the hill districts of Churchandpur and Kangpokai. So the Zomi Student Federation had requested the Delhi High Court to mandate the state government to provide financial assistance to the candidates from the hill regions so that they could take up the prelims examination in other centers. The UPSC had said that aspirants from the hill districts, they can relocate to other centers which are listed over here. You can take a look either at Aizawl in Mizoram, Kohima in Nagaland, or even Kolkata in West Bengal, Delhi, Dispur, Jorhat in Assam, and also Shillong in Meghalaya. So these alternate centers are provided for students from Manipur, particularly from the hill districts. And the Manipur state government also has assured Delhi High Court that it will bear the financial expenditure, the financial cost incurred for the aspirants when they are traveling to these centers. So if you're an aspirant from the hill regions of Manipur, which has been affected by the violence, if you're planning to give your prelims exam on June 16th, do note that you can opt to write at other centers and financial assistance will also be provided by the Manipur state government. For any further doubts or clarifications, you can reach out to the UPSC helpline number, which is provided on the UPSC website. So with this, let's get started with the discussion of today's The Hindu by looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition, I have chosen 12 important articles. So let's take up these topics one by one, and the first 3 articles especially require a detailed analysis, largely from a mains point of view. And then we'll look at the smaller prelims articles. So let's ensure that it's a comprehensive discussion so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are liking our initiatives, do support us with your likes, your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So before we start, there's a small announcement. Today at 8 p.m., Sarmad Sir shall be conducting a special workshop on the Unacademy app. Essentially, the workshop is designed for working professionals who are aspiring to prepare for the civil services exam. Because working professionals face a unique challenge, especially with regard to time management. Several students are confused whether they should quit their jobs and prepare for the exam, or how to manage the time, the limited time that they have. And to find answers to all these questions, I urge you to attend today's session, and the link for registering for the session is provided in the video description below. And also note that our new batch for the English online classroom program has started from today. Today is the orientation session and the classes will begin from next week. And if you wish to enroll for the program, you can contact us over the number provided here. So with this, let's get started with the analysis of The Hindu by looking at an important article on page number 6 and 10. We have an editorial on page number 6 and a related article on page number 10. This article deals with the topic of pilot fatigue. It explores this topic in slight detail, but here I would like to go beyond the article, give you an entire coverage of this important topic as it can be relevant for GS paper 2 and GS paper 3. So first, let's understand the context. See, recently in January 2024, the Civil Aviation Regulator, which is the DGCA, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, had issued a set of new guidelines for the private airline industry in the country with regard to flight duty restrictions. Pilots and the crew who operate the passenger flights and as well as other commercial flights, they are under enormous stress and pressure as they are often forced to work long hours, which affects their natural body rhythm. This compromises their quality of sleep, puts them under a lot of stress and fatigue, and it could lead to errors while they are operating the aircraft. So to ensure that aviation safety and overall passenger and crew safety is provided for, there are a set of regulations and standards that are enforced by the Civil Aviation Regulator. This is referred to as the flight duty time limitations. As per established international standards, India's Civil Aviation Regulator has notified a set of standard regulatory rules with regard to certain limitations on the number of hours that pilots are supposed to work. And it also deals with the breaks that pilots are supposed to get, the rest hours that they are supposed to get, and these time limitations apply for the flight crew as well. Now, of course, these regulations have been there from a long time, but recently there was an update which was done by the DGCA. In January 2024, DGCA introduced a set of new rules which was supposed to be implemented from the 1st of June. The goal was to provide a more relaxed, stress-free environment for the pilots so that their fatigue-related issues, their overwork-related issues could be handled so that pilots and crew members can get enough rest, and hence that they can ensure the safety of the flight and the passengers. So in this regard, the DGCA had notified these rules, but there was a strong opposition from the aviation industry. The private airlines in India and the Federation of Indian Airline Association, they strongly opposed the new rules by stating that this will increase their cost of operations. It became a matter of airline economics. It became a matter of the business viability of private airlines in India and a matter of their profitability. So the question here is, should we risk passenger safety and aviation safety for the sake of airline economics and business viability and profitability? Because just this week, the DGCA has deferred the implementation of these new rules. According to the Pilots Association in the country, the existing rules largely favor the airlines, and with the growth of India's airline industry, it's been alleged that Indian pilots are overstressed, overworked. They don't get enough breaks. They are put on these long rosters where they handle multiple flights in a day or two, or they are forced to take up these long haul flights, which does not give them enough time to rest and recuperate. So this in turn causes pilot fatigue. It affects their alertness. It affects their ability to take the right decisions while flying a passenger aircraft. So Pilots Association has been demanding from a long time that they need better regulations in India. So in line with the demands of the Pilots Association and in line with international standards, the DGCA had even notified a new set of rules which was supposed to come into effect from 1st of June. But following opposition from the airline industry, which is largely dominated by private airlines, the DGCA has gone back and it has deferred the implementation for the time being. So essentially, the existing guidelines will continue to be implemented. So this brings up the debate between aviation safety and aviation economics. Of course, both are equally important. It's important to ensure that airline business in India is viable and profitable, or else how will the companies function? At the same time, aviation safety, passenger safety acquires utmost importance, given how such issues can easily result in aviation disasters. So let's explore this issue further. Let's deep dive into this topic. And first, let's understand what exactly is pilot fatigue. What causes pilot fatigue? So to answer this question, we will rely upon the definition provided by an international organization that deals with aviation safety. I'm referring to the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. This organization itself is very important for your prelims. At the end of this discussion, I'll give you some important facts about International Civil Aviation Organization based on which prelims questions can be asked. So for now, let's understand what is the definition of pilot fatigue. As per ICAO standards, pilot fatigue is a physiological state of reduced mental or physical performance capability, which results from sleep loss or extended wakefulness, circadian phase, or workload. Essentially, it's a physiological function caused by deprivation of sleep, long work hours, limited rest, and a complete upset of your circadian rhythm. Is that clear? Because see, if you look at long haul flights where pilots are flying from one time zone to another, let's say a flight from India to Europe or India to US, these are long haul flights with a travel time of anywhere between 12 to 16 hours at the minimum. Plus you take in the additional time required as far as the entire protocols are concerned. So pilots sometimes stretch their work time beyond what is considered as normal. Plus they are flying from one time zone to another, crossing multiple time zones. This completely affects your body rhythm, your circadian rhythm, your sleep cycle gets affected. And if they don't get enough rest, if there is no strict limitation on the number of work hours for pilots, not just on a daily basis, but also on a weekly basis, on a monthly and yearly basis. If these time limitations are not placed by regulators, private airlines might overexploit them. It's not just about the welfare of pilots, it's about aviation safety. Because pilots who are under fatigue may not be able to function adequately. Their capacity might be compromised. The lack of sleep might inhibit decision making. It might push them to take the wrong calls, leading to pilot error, which might cause an accident. Right? There have been many air crashes in the past where the reason has been attributed to pilot error, and in several cases it has been linked with pilot fatigue and pilot workload as well. So as a result, this topic acquires a lot of significance. Right? With regard to aviation safety, ensuring that our pilots and even the crew members are not overworked, it's very crucial, and this has to be mandated by the civil aviation regulator in the country. So here, pilots experience tremendous workload, plus the very nature of the work is such that, right, they are on these long haul flights, or sometimes they have these multiple rosters in a day or two where they fly across multiple locations. Right? So this puts them under enormous stress, affects the body circadian rhythm, affects the sleep cycle, and sleep deprived pilots may not be able to carry out all the functions that are required from a pilot. So that is the concern that comes up here. In fact, in aviation terminology, sometimes such a flight which is piloted by overstressed crew, it's often called a red eye flight, meaning the pilots have developed a red eye because of sleeplessness, right? So this has been a concern not just in India, but it is a global concern as well. In many other countries, even in developed countries, there have been similar concerns about pilots being overstressed and overworked. Again, it applies for even the crew members, not just the pilots. So that is the reason why there are some international standards with regard to the workload to be placed on pilots and crew members. These standards are laid down by the International Civil Aviation Organization. So given the unpredictable work environment, the long work duration, and how the sleep gets affected, how the circadian body rhythms get affected, it's very, very crucial for regulators to keep in mind how important rest is for pilots and crew members. So that is why every aviation regulator in their country, they bring out these flight duty time limitation rules. The ICAO, which has laid down the international standards, expects the respective regulators in that country to bring out the rules which are in line with these global standards. So in the case of India, it is DGCA which brings out these regulations by looking at the global standards set by the International Civil Aviation Organization. So if you look at what kind of regulation is implemented here. One, these FDTL rules, flight duration time limitation rules, they basically categorize the pilot work, their job description, into different categories. As I told you, there could be certain pilots who operate only domestic routes. So they'll be flying these shorter flights of 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour duration. So often the roster is such that these pilots are given 2 to 3 flights in a particular day, and then they are given a certain amount of rest. Or in some cases, there could be short international flights, maybe 3 to 5 hour flights. So again, that has to be placed under a separate category, depending on the workload and the rest required for them. Then if you look at ultra long haul flights that are transcontinental, where the flight duration itself is more than 15 hours, right? And the total work time would easily extend beyond 24 hours. So all these factors have to be kept in mind while coming out with any such regulations. That's exactly what India's DGCA had done. There are in-flight rest periods as well. For example, on long duration flights, there are co-pilots and backup pilots as well. And usually the flight is put on autopilot mode when it is cruising at a certain altitude. So during these phases, the pilots can rest on board as well. So this has to be mandated. The airline should not push their pilots beyond what is necessary, right? So for that, the flight duty has to be categorized into different groups, depending on the number of landings, the total flight duration, the distance that they are flying, the locations that they are flying to. So based on that, there is a complex system which has been devised by the DGCA. Under the existing norms, there is a concern that Indian pilots are overstressed. Indian pilots are being overworked. So this has remained a concern, and to address this, the DGCA was bringing out these new regulations. But these new regulations have been opposed by the airline industry. The airline industry has a lot of concerns because the DGCA is expecting Indian airlines to not just follow the strict DGCA standards, but also ensure that their internal regulations are on par with global standards. The global standards laid down by ICAO, and as well as global standards followed in US and European civil aviation markets. If you look at the FAA, which is the civil aviation regulator in the US, Federal Aviation Administration, it has laid down few golden standards which is considered as a model framework for rest of the world. Even in the European civil aviation market, the European Aviation Safety Agency, which is part of the European Union, has laid down a standard framework which is often seen as a gold standard when it comes to aviation safety. So India's regulator expects the airlines in India to follow the DGCA standards and ensure that they are on par with these global standards as well. So this is where airlines have a concern. Their main concern was the deadline. The deadline that new guidelines have to come into effect from 1st of June. The private airlines, they said that if we are forced to implement this, then there are only two options. One, either we have to recruit more pilots, around 15 to 25% additional manpower is necessary, because to account for more rest periods for existing pilots, right, and keeping the current flight traffic into account, the airlines said we will have to hire anywhere between 15 to 25% more pilots, which is nearly a quarter of their pilot workforce. So which will increase their cost of operations, considering the high salaries, also their training as well. So airlines said if we follow this option where we try to increase the number of pilots, it's not practical to achieve that within the deadline. In just 3-4 months, we can't hire 24 or 25% of additional pilots and train them and account for their salaries and expenses. So this could lead to losses for the companies as well, and the business itself could become unviable. And the other option is that we have to reduce the number of flights. The airline industry said, if you force us to implement, right, since we can't hire more pilots, we can't pay them, we can't train them, the only other option for us is to cancel the flights. If you have to rely just on the existing pilot workforce, at least 20% of the flights should be cancelled, both domestic and international, which could put tremendous stress on the aviation market, that too during the peak summer season. This could inflate the prices. It will lead to ticket cancellations, which will have a wide impact across the economy. So these two concerns were raised by the airline industry, which is quite understandable. And DGCA, instead of trying to work out a middle path, it has, as of now, stopped the implementation of the new guidelines. It has deferred the implementation, saying that it need not be enforced by 1st of June, and until a path is decided, the existing guidelines will continue. So this is what the DGCA has announced just a few days ago. But the concern here is that, is the DGCA compromising aviation safety just because of these business-related concerns from the airline industry? Of course, the profitability concerns are understandable, but should it come at the expense of aviation safety? Because please understand the Indian aviation market. It has grown exponentially in the last few years. Domestically, a lot of new routes have been added, number of flights have gone up, air travel has gone up exponentially. Because of government initiatives like UDAN, even tier 2, tier 3 cities have become popular destinations domestically. And internationally as well, Indian airlines are flying to many, many more new destinations. So now the concern is, with the growing demand and the growing traffic in Indian airspace, is it advisable to overstress and burden our pilots? Is it prudent on the part of DGCA to defer the implementation instead of finding other alternative paths? The concerns raised by aviation industry is understandable. As I told you, it might be difficult for them to hire so many pilots and train them within a short deadline. Plus the operational expenses will shoot up, correct? Which means the ticket prices may go up as well. So there is a much bigger impact, a broader impact that needs to be considered on the economy. Or the other option is to cut down the flights, which will again increase the ticket prices. So airlines are also caught in a fix. Pilots definitely have a genuine demand, but DGCA, which is the regulator, has at the last minute, deferred the implementation, thus raising questions about aviation safety in India. Understood? So the editorial is of the view that these standards are to be seen as sacrosanct. The DGCA has a bigger responsibility here to not just follow the global standards, but to ensure that the balance is struck between aviation economics and aviation safety. And at any given point, aviation safety should take a priority. Aviation safety should be given a higher priority, and DGCA should exercise its independence. Now it appears that DGCA has fallen under pressure by the airline industry, which represents a strong, powerful lobby, right? So the question is DGCA risking the safety of aviation in India by siding with the argument of aviation industry? A better path would have been to work out a more reasonable time frame, and until then provide a more relaxed duty limitation so that pilots are also not overstressed. But instead, the DGCA has entirely stopped the implementation of the new rules, and it has deferred this to a future date. So that is why the editorial is asking this question. It's urging the regulator to take an independent stand, to look at both sides of the argument and prioritize aviation safety over aviation economics. So that is what we take away from this important editorial. Now please note down some important facts about the ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization. It was established in the year 1944 and it started functioning from 1947. It is a specialized agency of the United Nations. Please remember that it's a UN agency, a specialized agency of the UN, and it was established through the Chicago Convention. The Chicago Convention of 1944 led to the establishment of International Civil Aviation Organization. The Chicago Convention is also called Convention on International Civil Aviation. So this UN organization is responsible for laying down global standards with regard to aviation safety, aviation standards, and also to regulate the usage of civilian airspace. So India is also a member of the International Civil Aviation Organization. It's headquartered in Montreal in Canada. So India is a member. India's DGCA works closely with the ICAO, right? So it lays down these standards for aviation safety, how to investigate air accidents, how to prevent air accidents from happening. All these standards, global standards, are established by this specialized agency of the UN. So please remember these basic facts. You can expect a prelims question over here. Now let's look at the next article from page number 6. We have a column on page number 6 where the writer, who's an eminent scholar, a professor from JNU, a professor of economics at JNU, is talking about electoral bonds in India and how it has corroded the Indian democracy, how it highlights the hollowed out nature of Indian democracy because of excessive criminalization of Indian politics. As you know, electoral bonds was recently declared as unconstitutional by the Supreme Court of India because of its opaqueness in political funding, because of the route it created for crony capitalism, where private industries could easily violate rules and guidelines or even commit illegal acts and later fund certain political parties in power, either at state or center, to get away from these investigations. So all these allegations have raised serious concerns about the nature of political funding in India, and the overall opaqueness involved in the scheme led to the Supreme Court declaring electoral bonds as unconstitutional. Supreme Court even directed the SBI, which was issuing the electoral bonds, to release all the data into the public domain, to give the data to the Election Commission, which would release the data into the public domain. So now we know what's the kind of funding that different parties have got, right? And who are the donors as well. Most of them are large industries that have donated hundreds of crores of rupees. And it clearly highlights the nexus that could exist possibly between private capitalist industries and the political parties in India. This has raised very serious questions about the nature of political funding in India. So that's what the writer is exploring here. The writer says, it has been a known fact that political funding in India has always been driven by illegal activities. Because if you look at the electoral expenditure limit laid down by Election Commission of India, a candidate is not supposed to spend more than 95 lakhs for a Lok Sabha constituency. Right? That is the limit set for Lok Sabha constituencies, where a contesting candidate is not supposed to spend more than 95 lakh rupees. It's much lower for a MLA constituency. But the reality is that no candidate sticks to this expenditure limit. Even though officially they might show the given expenditure limit, unofficially candidates are spending anywhere between 40 to 50 crores per constituency. This is apart from what their party is spending. Apart from the party fund, which is used for campaigns and other organizational purposes, each candidate who's contesting for either a MP seat or a MLA seat is known to spend at least around 50 crore on average, which means nearly 49 crore rupees, which is being spent in every constituency, is coming from illegal routes. It's nothing but black money. The question is, where are they raising these illegal funds from? This points to the excessive criminalization of Indian politics, the deep-rooted nexus that Indian politicians and political parties have developed, not just with private organizations and corporates, but also with the criminal mafia and organized criminal networks. Now, what electoral bonds did was, in the name of legalizing political funding and streamlining political funding, it brought more opaqueness into the system and gave a way through which such illegal funds could be legalized as well. Essentially, even a bribe paid by, let's say, a corporate donor to a political party in power could get disguised as legal political funding because of the very nature of the electoral bond scheme. Because the information related to the donor and which party received the donation was entirely secret. It was known only to the SBI, right? And it was not transparent. The public, the voters who have a right to know, we have a right to information under Article 19 with regard to how our political parties are raising funds, who's donating to them. But this was entirely blocked out by the electoral bond scheme. It had created a so-called legal route where even corporate donations, which could be a bribe in many cases, right, could be disguised as legal legitimate funding. So there are several investigative reports which are coming out right now based on the data brought out by the SBI, which shows a correlation between certain events regarding the corporate industry in India how some of them were facing investigations by law enforcement agencies, or how they were cutting the regulations and the regulatory process, or violating certain rules and laws. And around the same time, when a company was facing a challenge, it's been noted that there's a pattern where they would have contributed funds to a certain political party, either at the center or at the state, around the same time. And after the electoral funds were donated through the electoral bonds, it appears that all their problems ended. Either their regulatory problems or any investigations against the company has stopped after that, giving rise to these speculations and allegations that there is a nexus, a crony capitalist nexus, where large corporates in India are cutting regulations, rules, etc., and colluding with the political parties to get these concessions. Right? And essentially, bribes are getting disguised as legal, legitimate political funding. And also the worst part about electoral bond was that, and this was even acknowledged by the Supreme Court, by the Chief Justice, that let's say a company X can procure an electoral bond, make a deposit with the SBI, get the electoral bond, and trade the electoral bond to another company Y. Then this company could go and donate this to a political party. The problem here is that the bond would have been first taken in the name of a different company. It is this company which would have gone through the KYC process done by the SBI. But later, this company can go and trade this, give it to someone else, give it to some other company. And in many cases, these could be shell companies. These could be companies set up just for channeling political funding. They may not have a genuine business of their own. Right? There are instances where loss-making companies also have managed to donate funds. The question is, where did they get the kind of money that they have donated? So there have been many such loopholes in the electoral bond scheme, which raises very serious questions about the very nature of political funding in India and how it has hollowed out Indian democracy. Even prior to introduction of electoral bond scheme, the writer is discussing the criminalization of Indian politics, how criminal funds have entered Indian politics, and how crony capitalism, the nexus between corporates and politicians, has led to a corrupt nexus between them, which erodes the very foundation of Indian democracy. So that is the concern that the writer is raising, and he's exploring this in this article. So that's what we take away from this column. And with this, let's look at the next article on the same page. This article is a little different because it is exploring the issue related to street dogs in India, and it is shedding light on the broader human and canine bond and relationship that exists from hundreds of years. The topic could be relevant for social issues, and it could be relevant for your ethics paper as well. Usually we don't get articles related to ethics, but wherever we do have such articles, it's important that we discuss and explore these topics. So here the writers are talking about the recent incidents that have hit headlines in India related to dogs and dog attacks against humans. We've all heard about man-animal conflict, which deals with wild animals and humans. But here, in India especially, in our urban areas, we have seen certain incidents where street dogs have attacked humans. There have been few tragic incidents where street dogs have even mauled young kids and children, leading to their death as well. So this has given rise to a lot of demand against street dogs. It has led to a lot of hatred as well against street dogs. So this has become a much debated topic in India, where there are two extremes to this. So let's explore what exactly is the issue here and what could be the approach of the concerned authorities. Because there are many ethical dimensions involved here, right? It requires a more balanced approach to deal with the problem. See, first and foremost, is there a street dog problem in India? Absolutely yes. It's important to acknowledge that. But are the dogs responsible for the crisis? Definitely no. It is our civic authorities, our governments, who have failed to deal with the crisis. Due to poor urban development, due to poor urban planning, and due to poor civic sense amongst our citizens, that is the reason why this problem has come up. But at the same time, should we ignore the problem? Right? Definitely no, because few animal activists are completely against any villainization of the dogs in these incidents. Of course, dogs can't be blamed for it, but definitely it's important to acknowledge that it is indeed a challenge and a crisis. You can't have street dogs attacking children where children are losing their lives. At the same time, you can't have people who are against animals, people in general who have a very misrepresented view about dogs, to target the innocent animals for something that they are not responsible for. Right? So we need to understand the complex challenges involved, approach this issue with a more empathetic view, and focus more on the human and the canine relationship that has existed from hundreds of years. If you look at the human-dog relationship, it's one of the most beautiful relationships that exist. Right? At least there is a 15,000-year plus bond that exists, that dates back to centuries and millenniums. This is established through fossil records as well, where even in ancient civilizations, canine remains have been buried with human remains. That clearly shows the domestication of the dog and how both the species have come together to form a unique bond between themselves. Right? Dogs indeed have played a pivotal role from hunter-gatherer civilization to even farming and later civilized societies that developed. From offering security to helping in hunting, in helping in general, providing emotional attachment. Dogs have played a pivotal role in the evolution of human beings as well. And vice versa. Humans have taken care of dogs, helped in the unique evolution that dogs have undergone. So there is a sacred bond, an unquestionable bond that exists, and there's no reason why people shouldn't believe that dog is indeed human's best friend. This saying comes with a lot of weight, and it is based on available empirical evidence. So given that fact, you can't really ignore the animal rights issue and the humane angle that is needed to deal with the issue. There are many who try to villainize the dogs, put the blame entirely on the dogs. Right? You might have seen this happening in your cities, in your resident colonies. Right, where there might be these random uncles and aunties who might start campaigning against having pet dogs as well, placing unnecessary restrictions on raising dogs. Right? But they don't understand that the animals are themselves not to be blamed in such situations. It's largely the way we have mismanaged our cities which is leading to the problem. For example, if you look at unscientific waste management and waste disposal, it's the urban authorities and the citizens who are responsible. This indeed becomes a breeding ground, particularly for street dogs. And also the inability of the urban local bodies to control the population. What you need is a humane method, a more humane, empathetic solution, right, where you ensure that the current dog population is neutered to control the population. Local authorities have this big responsibility. They have to work with the residents and the citizens and ensure that existing street dogs, they are caught in a humane manner, neutered and then released. Right? Culling is never an option. Many extremists have suggested culling of dogs, which is extremely inhuman, as I told you, given the strong human-dog bond and relationship that exists, and it is largely looked down upon. Right? You can't really compare a dog with any other pest or animal. And also there is scientific evidence again to show that culling is never a solution. In UK there was a similar crisis a few years ago, where culling was employed as an option, but as the dogs were eliminated, the same ecological niche was occupied by foxes and other pests, which became even more problematic. They would attack children, they would spread diseases as well, leading to a new kind of problem because there weren't dogs enough numbers to keep a check on other wild pests and other animals. So just eliminating the dogs is never the solution, and neither it's a humane approach or an empathetic approach. So neutering the existing street dogs, taking care of them, vaccinating them, because even if there is a bite, ensure that it doesn't spread rabies or other diseases. So vaccination and neutering is the responsibility of the urban local bodies along with the citizen and resident associations, and this is something they have to fulfill as their duty. At the same time, animal rights activists also have to be mindful of these concerns which are genuine. See, there are many incidents where animal rights activists, of course, they do this with a good intention, but it ends up harming the society at large. When they stand up for dog rights, there's nothing wrong with that. We do have very strong animal right laws in India. But problem is, in genuine cases, when there is a unnecessary interference caused, right, it could lead to further villainization of the dogs. For example, you take some recent incidents in Delhi, near Mumbai, and in Bangalore as well. There were a few recent incidents where street dogs have mauled young children to death. There was another incident, I think in Gujarat, where a high-profile businessman lost his balance and fell and lost his life, apparently. But he was a dog lover. He used to feed the street dogs, right? So these are very complex incidents. You can't really explain as to why this incident happened, or you can't pinpoint the blame just on the street dogs. In that regard, animal rights activists are correct. You should not end up villainizing the street dogs. But at the same time, you can't just remain silent and take no action. Right? What is needed is an empathetic, humane approach where you first focus on controlling the dog population, the urban street dog population, through neutering and improve the safety levels with better vaccination, right? And also in many cases, dogs get desperate usually when there is a large-scale food shortage. When food and water shortage is reported, right? Usually it's very difficult even for street dogs to get basic food and water in cities. That is what pushes them sometimes to get more aggressive. So there are many environmental factors involved in their aggressive behavior. Or even as growing puppies, they could have faced a lot of abuse and attacks by humans. There could be certain cases where a few sadistic people, you would have seen such incidents as well, where people have been shown to be beating up dogs, throwing them from buildings, causing severe harm to them, which is a gross violation of animal rights. So any such abuse, any such constant threats from humans also could trigger the aggressive behavior of dogs. So dogs themselves, of course, are never responsible for this. It's the larger environmental factors that are present. So there are issues related to civic sense amongst our citizens, and with regard to urban governance, the unplanned expansion of our cities and the dumping of waste, the dumping of solid waste, its unscientific management, it creates a breeding ground for explosion in street dog population. So what you need is a more balanced, a nuanced approach that deals with this issue on a more with a more humane and empathetic approach. And the only solution here is to control the population. Right? You can do it in a humane manner without resorting to culling. One is neutering the street dogs, getting them vaccinated, spreading more sense amongst all residents, civilians in that particular region. Right? Making people aware that dogs are not your enemy. The problem is the way we have mismanaged it is what is causing the problem. Right? So bringing that balance between both extremes. On one hand, animal rights activists are on one extreme, and the people who oppose dogs on every ground, they are on the other extreme. So what you need is a middle ground to be found, and the responsibility lies with your urban local bodies. So you might think the topic is not relevant for the exam, but trust me, UPSC does prioritize animal rights. There have been some related questions that have come in the past, so please focus on the topic. Approach this as a civic issue, as a governance-related issue. It is indeed an urban governance problem. So try and think and explore more ideas on these lines. Let me know what you think in the comments. What's your stand on the so-called dog menace in the country? Is it really a menace? Because can you really blame the dogs for it? Right? These innocent souls which have no idea, they are a byproduct of the environmental conditions we have created. Right? So think about it. Let me know what you think in the comments and what are the solutions as well. Or if you face any such incidents or experiences, you can share that. Because in your ethics paper, UPSC will rely on case studies. UPSC will give priority for your personal views, opinions, and experiences. So bringing that side out on such topics, on such debatable ethical topics, is very, very important. So let me know in the comments. So now let's head towards the prelim section. Let's look at the smaller articles in the newspaper. On page number 4, we have an article related to the UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act of 1967. Now this is the primary anti-terror law in India. It's the primary law against terrorism, which is invoked by Ministry of Home Affairs, the National Investigation Agency, and also by the concerned state police when they are dealing with terrorist incidents in the country. Now, this law was never meant to be used against terrorism. When it was enacted in 1967, right, it was introduced in a very different context. It was dealing with so-called unlawful activities, which was seen as a security threat to the nation, especially at a time when we were dealing with external threats and problems. Because in 1960s, India dealt with difficult external challenges. We had the 62 war with China, 65 war with Pakistan. So when these external wars were going on, domestically there were some challenges to India's national integration and unity. So because of this, the then Indira Gandhi government had set up a committee to recommend on how we could improve national integration, which led to this recommendation that we should have a law that deals with so-called unlawful activities. In fact, modern day terrorism didn't even exist back then. The kind of terrorism that we have witnessed, which is largely state-sponsored, didn't even exist back then when the law was introduced. So this law dealt with a broad set of so-called unlawful activities. Later, this law has been amended several times. The law has gone through multiple amendments because the other anti-terrorism laws that were introduced in the 80s and early 2000, they were all very controversial. You might have heard about TADA, POTA, etc. Right? The Terrorist and Disruptive Activities Prevention Act of 1985. That was primarily introduced to tackle the Khalistan movement and other terrorist movements going on in India in the 1980s. That became very controversial because it gave excessive powers to the police, which could often be misused to target innocents, to torture the suspects and get confessions, which even led to custodial deaths as well. There were large-scale allegations of human rights violations under TADA, and eventually the law was allowed to lapse in 1995. TADA had a sunset clause that it would expire 10 years after its passage, and the parliament decided not to extend it, and accordingly it was allowed to lapse in 95. TADA was later replaced by POTA, Prevention of Terrorism Act, by the Vajpayee government. But again, POTA had the similar concerns that it gave very stringent provisions, very stringent powers to the police and law enforcement agencies, which more or less is misused, and that leads to targeting of innocents. With regard to bail provisions, with regard to detention provisions, the kind of evidence which was admissible in court, right? There was a lot of relaxations given to the police and law enforcement, which more or less was misused to target several innocents who were not even involved in terrorist activities. So even POTA became very controversial, and it was repealed in 2004. The next UPA government under Manmohan Singh repealed POTA. So essentially, we didn't have a good law against terrorism, even though India was one of the biggest victims of terrorism. So it's in this context that UAPA was amended several times, and it was upgraded to become India's primary law against terrorism. Is that clear? So today, the law provides for a definition of terrorism. It defines all kinds of terrorist activities. It defines other prohibited activities, including membership of a terror organization, involvement in any kind of terror activity, even giving logistical support, financial or moral support to terrorist activities is also covered under the law. It also covers financing of terrorism and terrorist activities. Essentially, terrorist financing has been covered here, and we are following the FATF standards. Globally, we have this intergovernmental body called FATF, Financial Action Task Force. The FATF lays down these global standards to counter money laundering and terrorist financing. So in India, we are following the FATF standards through two primary legislations. One is PMLA, Prevention of Money Laundering Act, through which we have implemented the anti-money laundering standards of FATF, and through UAPA, we are implementing the counter-terrorist financing measures as recommended by FATF. So under this law, the Home Ministry, which is the nodal ministry for internal security, it has the authority to designate terrorist organizations. So any organization involved in terrorist activity can be proscribed and designated as a terrorist outfit. Along with that, MHA also has the powers to designate individual terrorists. In 2019, the law was amended to allow the union government to designate individual terrorists as well. Is that clear? So all the major terrorist outfits, be it the Khalistani terror outfits, Northeast insurgent groups, the CPI Maoist involved in Naxalism, or even foreign entities like LTT, Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, Kashmir-centric organizations, many of them which are sponsored by Pakistan. All these extremist organizations are listed as terrorist organizations under UAPA. And even several individual terrorists who have been involved in acts of terrorism against India, right? Even they are listed as individual terrorists under the law, which was made possible from 2019 following this amendment. Now, why am I mentioning all these basic provisions? I'm mentioning this because there was a certain case that came up in front of Madras High Court with regard to an outfit called Popular Front of India, or PFI. Recently, the PFI has been banned as a terrorist organization by the union government. The PFI primarily has a presence in Kerala and Karnataka. It's allegedly involved in extremist and terrorist activities, and MHA recently notified Popular Front of India as a terrorist organization in the country. Now, following this designation, which is done under provisions of Section 3 of UAPA, the government also has the authority to freeze the accounts, freeze the financial assets of these entities as per Section 7 provisions. According to Section 7, the financial assets related to this banned organization, and if these financial assets, funds are being used for extremist terrorist activities, then such funds can be frozen by the authorities. But here, there was a case with regard to whether the government has the powers to freeze these assets, right? When, in what context does it apply? So here the Madras High Court has said that bank accounts cannot be frozen under UAPA without satisfying that funds are indeed being used for banned outfits, for funding banned organizations. You can't simply go on randomly blocking bank accounts, freezing financial assets without establishing that these funds were indeed being used to fund and finance these terrorist organizations. Is that clear? See, there's no question on the extremist activities of PFI. Right? There are several cases against PFI members. It has been known to be involved in extremist activities. The point is, several other bank accounts which have been frozen by the authorities. The question is, was it really being used to fund the organization? The Madras High Court is not satisfied with the evidence and answers given by the government, and hence it has instructed the authorities that you can't freeze bank accounts without giving evidence that these funds were indeed being used for terrorist financing. All right? So this power exists under Section 7 of UAPA, where government can freeze the funds, freeze the financial assets. So now Madras High Court has said that this is not a blanket provision. You have to satisfy this demand, that you have to show evidence that these funds were indeed being used to fund and sponsor these extremist organizations and their terrorist activities. So that is what we take away from this article. Next, on page 7, we have a column referring to the Citizenship Amendment Act rules that were recently notified, and it refers to a certain community in West Bengal which stands to benefit from these new citizenship rules. The article is referring to the Matua community, or also called the Matua Mahasangha. So you should know more about this community as it could be relevant for prelims. The Matua Mahasangha are classified as scheduled castes in West Bengal. Essentially, they are Dalits who underwent a religious reformation movement back in 1800s. In 1860, under the leadership of Harichand Thakur, a popular Dalit leader from the Bengal province of British India, he led a religious reformation movement where he brought the lower caste, the Dalits, together and opposed caste-based discrimination which was widely prevalent in Hindu society. So this community has always been centered in the Bengal region, primarily in modern-day Bangladesh. Is that clear? So this community, it has migrated to India's West Bengal following the 1947 partition, and also during the 1971 war, when Bangladesh was liberated from Pakistan, right? So during these events, there has been a large-scale migrant inflow, refugee inflow sometimes, involving the Matua Mahasangha community as well. So today, millions of these community members are found in the North and South Paraganas district, North and South 24 Paraganas district. They account for the second largest scheduled caste community in the state after the Koch Rajbanshis, and they also represent a very significant vote bank in the region. Now, this community stands to benefit from the new citizenship amendment rules because they fit the definition of the Citizenship Amendment Act. Is that clear? What does the Citizenship Amendment Act state? What is its primary objective? Its primary objective is to grant citizenship to non-Muslims from Bangladesh, Pakistan and Afghanistan who might have faced religious persecution. And if they are seeking asylum in India, India will not only take them in but also grant citizenship to them. Right? So there is a certain cutoff date which is set. The entire process has been outlined through the new rules notified, and this has been welcomed by the Matua community as they are Bengali Hindus. Because they are not excluded by the rules, they are part of the Citizenship Amendment Act. They allege that they have faced religious persecution in Bangladesh from 1940s to 1970s, post which the community migrated to India. So on this ground, they welcome the new rules as it allows them to get Indian citizenship. It's also known that most of the members of Matua community, they already possess Aadhaar cards, voter ID cards, but official citizenship was what was pending. So the new rules notified will benefit the community. So this is what you need to know about Matua Mahasangha. Next, on page 1 and 8, there's a report which provides a development regarding India-Ukraine relations. As you know, the Russia-Ukraine war is raging, and India has largely sided with Russia directly or indirectly. So Ukraine's foreign minister has paid a visit to India, urging India's involvement to help Ukraine in achieving a ceasefire with Russia. Ukraine has been pushing India from several months to speak about the Russian aggression, to criticize Russia and even play a positive role to bring this conflict to an end. So to achieve this, Ukraine's foreign minister has come to India, met with India's foreign minister, and India also has expressed concern about the ongoing conflict and has urged both parties to find a negotiated, mediated settlement. But during the discussion, both the foreign ministers, they mentioned something very important. They have mentioned the Global Peace Summit, which is proposed to be hosted by Switzerland to negotiate the Russia-Ukraine war and bring the war to an end. So you should know what is the Global Peace Summit. Is that clear? The Global Peace Summit is a proposed war conference or a war summit which is going to be hosted by Switzerland in a few months. It was announced earlier this year, and Ukraine is the one which is pushing for it. Ukraine's President Zelensky has put a lot of hope on Switzerland's role as a neutral mediator. So Switzerland is going to host this summit that might bring many top global powers together, along with the two warring parties, Russia and Ukraine, to try and find a negotiated settlement. We still don't have clarity on when the summit will happen. Hopefully it will happen in the next 2 to 3 months. And Ukraine's foreign minister has urged India to play a role at the upcoming Global Peace Summit. Now the question is, why is Switzerland hosting this summit? What's the reason behind it? Why has Ukraine pushed Switzerland and worked with Switzerland to try and organize this Global Peace Summit? The answer is, Switzerland has a policy of neutrality in international geopolitics. There are few countries in the world which have declared that they are going to be neutral in any war, in any conflict. They don't take sides in geopolitical power games. And Switzerland is one of them. Through the Treaty of Paris in 1815, Switzerland committed itself to political neutrality in international relations, and it strictly follows this even today. In fact, Switzerland was so committed to this policy that until 2002, it did not even become a member of United Nations. It is not even a member of NATO. Despite being a West European country, a West European democracy, it has not joined the NATO military alliance, because Switzerland has a stated policy of political neutrality with regard to all wars, conflicts, and international geopolitics and relations. So Switzerland has been known to be a neutral mediator between different warring parties. Apart from Switzerland, there are 2 other countries in the world which also have a similar neutral position in geopolitics. Do you know which are these 2 countries, and can you mention the names of these countries in the comments below? Is that clear? Apart from Switzerland, there are 2 other countries which have a similar policy, slightly similar policy with regard to international relations. They always remain neutral. They don't usually take sides. So which are the other 2 countries I'm talking about? If you know, please mention that in the comments. Next, please note that recently Switzerland has been showing a slight shift in its policy of neutrality. That's also the reason why the topic is very important, right? After Russia attacked Ukraine and threatened Europe's security in general, Switzerland has been having a rethink on its policy of neutrality, and for the first time, it attended a NATO meeting. A Switzerland minister represented the country at a NATO meeting a few months ago following the Russian attack on Ukraine. So this has given rise to speculation that Switzerland might change its position of neutrality and it might even join NATO. We never know, right? So that is why the topic is important. You should know the position of neutrality of Switzerland and also the other two countries which I was mentioning, which also have a similar neutral position. Next, on page 10, we have an article related to the right of the disabled people. See, Government of India has passed an act through the Parliament, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, that defines a set of legal rights for disabled people in the country. Now, when it comes to cinemas and movies, it's often been alleged that our cinemas and movies are not disabled friendly. Be it accessing a movie theater, right? They may not have adequate ramps, adequate facilities for visually impaired or hearing impaired, for example. And even the movie makers in India don't pay enough attention to add closed captions or subtitles and other aids that are needed for visually impaired and hearing impaired people. So in this regard, the Ministry of Information Broadcasting recently brought out a set of guidelines to make cinemas and movies more inclusive. So here there is a concern that the new regulatory rules, they are not pushing the industry, the movie industry, to make it more disabled friendly. That's why a group of petitioners had approached the Delhi High Court. And Delhi High Court has recognized that disabled people have a legal right to accessibility. It's an enforceable right under the law. Ensuring that disabled people have access to all public spaces. That includes your movie theaters. That includes watching a movie, the movie experience, right? The question of accessibility can be enforced as a legal right under the law. That's the key point we take away from this article. The Delhi High Court has recognized this legal right, that visually impaired, those with hearing disabilities, they have a right to access movie theaters, they have a right to watch, understand movies and enjoy movies and have the same experience just like the others. This can be made possible by mandating our movie makers and the cinema industry to focus on these interventions which can be done through subtitles, closed captioning and other aids which are available to make it friendly for disabled people as well. Also, this is to do with physical motor disability, right? Those who can't really access movie theaters, those who are on wheelchairs, those who are permanently disabled, right? They need more facilities in cinema theaters to make it more accessible. So this has been clearly recognized as a legal right which is enforceable under the given law, which is Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. Next, the Indian Navy has carried out another major operation again in the Arabian Sea to counter piracy. Of late, Indian Navy has been repeatedly in the news for some of its daring operations across Arabian Sea, especially near Gulf of Aden. Recently, it conducted a 40-hour-long operation and rescued a hijacked vessel and detained more than 35 Somalian pirates. Another similar incident has occurred near Gulf of Aden, near the Socotra island of Yemen. An Iranian vessel had been hijacked several weeks ago, and the vessel primarily consisted of Pakistani crew members. So around 10 or 9 Somalian pirates had carried out the hijacking. They had held the crew members as hostage, and this vessel has now been rescued by the Indian Navy. Is that clear? The Indian Navy has again intervened and arrested these Somalian pirates, diffused the situation safely, and it has secured the safety of the Pakistani crew members, and that again marks India's major role in maritime security in the Indian Ocean region. Now for us, the important point here in this article is the Socotra Island, which occupies a strategic location in the Arabian coastline. Now you should know where exactly Socotra is located, what is its significance. right? There is a deep-rooted connection it shares with India as well. It has a lot of geostrategic, geo-economic significance. So you can expect a map-based question on Socotra Island. Socotra Island is a group of archipelago of islands present here in the extended Arabian Sea that links with Gulf of Aden. If you focus on the map, you can see Horn of Africa. This is the eastern part of Africa. You can see West Asia here. This is the coastline of Yemen. This is Oman and Gulf of Oman over here, right? This is Bab el-Mandeb Strait, Hormuz Strait over here connecting with Persian Gulf, and you have the Red Sea. So in this vital shipping lanes, you have a strategic group of islands present here called Socotra. It belongs to Yemen. It belongs to Yemen. All right. And recently, it has come under the control of the separatist groups, which have triggered a civil war in Yemen. As you know, in Yemen, the Houthis have taken over, and there are a few other separatist groups and radical groups operating here. So a set of separatist groups from southern Yemen, they have captured Socotra, and largely the island is under their control. Right now, it's very unsafe for anyone to visit. But Socotra has a rich history and legacy behind it, apart from its vital location. If you look at the maritime trade linkages between ancient India and European and other African, Asian civilizations, Socotra was right in the middle of it. For example, traders from Gujarat, Malabar region, the west coast of India, from thousands of years have been accessing Socotra Island when they were trading with the Gulf, when they were trading with the European civilizations. So there is a deep-rooted Indian connection. There are evidences here to link Indian traders and merchants from thousands of years who had settled and had a trading presence here. And today, given its location, where it's present near the opening of Gulf of Aden, it has a lot of strategic value to ensure that maritime security is maintained in this region. So this is where UAE, a major West Asian power, has gained access to Socotra. The United Arab Emirates has set up a military base as well at Socotra Island. And there are reports that India is trying to gain access to this military base, because we have very, very good defense and strategic relations with United Arab Emirates. So there are reports that India is trying to negotiate access to the military facilities that UAE has set up at Socotra. If India gets access to the port facilities here, it will definitely increase the operational range of Indian Navy, which has already been doing a phenomenal job in securing these waters, especially from threats of piracy and also from the threats posed by the Houthis. So that is why Socotra Island can be very, very important. Next, we have an article related to economy that mentions GEM, Government E-Marketplace. You should know what is GEM. Government E-Marketplace is a government-backed, government-owned e-commerce platform, quite similar to your other private e-commerce platforms. But the difference here is that this marketplace is primarily for public procurement. Now, let's say, for example, government ministries, they want to procure certain assets. Maybe they want to procure computers, they want to procure furniture, stationery items, right? So instead of procuring this through opaque processes where there is a chance of corruption, the government has introduced this online seamless transaction process for government and public procurement. So any government ministry, government department, be it from center or state, if they want to procure any kind of product, goods or service, right, they can transparently do this by working with the sellers and the merchants. So from procuring defense-related commodities to even construction work is being added to the list. Let's say there is government construction which has to be carried out, right? Instead of the opaque contract process where there's a lot of scope for corruption, delays in payments to contractors, this platform will solve those issues, as the government is now intending to bring government construction and even parts of defense procurement on this platform. Right? So it's an e-marketplace where government ministries, departments, etc., they can procure anything that they want from the market through a more transparent and user-friendly interface. Here payments happen seamlessly to the seller and the contractors. They don't have to wait, they don't have to meet with officials or ministers and lobby with them. because that is where a scope exists for some kind of bribe or corruption to take place. So that gets eliminated here with a very transparent procurement process. And now the government is looking at expanding the kind of procurement which is done through the platform. The government is looking to include construction work as well, where contractors will be onboarded. They can get involved in government construction and get their payments on time without any scope for delays or corruption. We already have different kinds of procurement happening here, from basic stationery items to computers and other technical inputs needed for government organs, right? Even parts of defense procurement as well, right? And even parts of election-related procurement. All of it is happening through GEM, Government E-Marketplace. Next, on the same page, there's an article referring to a fine which has been levied on India in an old case related to Devas and Antrix Corporation. Antrix Corporation, as you know, is the commercial arm of ISRO that was responsible for commercial deals with private vendors. Many years ago, a corruption scandal hit Antrix and ISRO when they had tied up with this controversial company called Devas. So this case had international ramifications. India pulled out of this agreement because of the corruption controversy surrounding the agreement. And apparently, this is a violation of a treaty between India and Germany, because this company was a German registered company, right? And as India pulled out of the agreement, this bilateral agreement that we had signed, it affected the financial interests of this German-based company. So this has been interpreted as a violation of India-Germany bilateral investment treaty. And who gave this interpretation? The UN CITRAL. Devas Corporation had approached the UN CITRAL, which is the international arbitration body for settling trade-related disputes, the UN Commission on International Trade Law. It's a legal platform, an arbitration platform as well, where international trade-related disputes and legal issues can be sorted through this organization. So Devas had approached UN CITRAL filing this case against India, that India had breached the bilateral investment treaty with Germany, causing financial losses to the company as India cancelled the agreement. So in this case, which went on for several years, UN CITRAL has upheld the argument of Devas, right? The related US court, which was hearing these cases, has levied a fine on India of $132 million. The case itself is not relevant for our exam, but what is important is UN CITRAL. You should know what is it, when was it established. It was established in 1966. It functions alternately at New York and Vienna in Austria. That's where it is based out of. And it mainly provides for interpretation of international trade law. Any trade-related legal issues and disputes can be handled by UN CITRAL. Is that clear? Now coming to another important development reported on page 12. Russia has used its veto power as a permanent member of UN Security Council to defeat the sanctions against North Korea. As you know, North Korea has been a rogue country which has not only tested and developed nuclear weapons illegally, but it has been creating a crisis all across East Asia and the Pacific. North Korea's rogue nuclear program has been a threat to South Korea, Japan, and US. And the way North Korea has been functioning and behaving in international order has been a global concern for many years. In fact, North Korea was a signatory to Non-Proliferation Treaty. It had signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, meaning it would never pursue the development of nuclear weapons. But later, North Korea quit NPT. It's the only country to have quit NPT. It's the only country which has signed and later quit NPT. And it went on to develop nuclear weapons and tested nuclear weapons as well in 2006. It has pursued the development of ballistic missiles and frequently launched ballistic missiles as well. So as a result, the UN and the global community have targeted North Korea with economic sanctions. Through the UN Security Council, crippling economic and technological sanctions have been placed on North Korea, which has isolated North Korea's economy from the rest of the world. It is also responsible for the economic crisis in the country and the large-scale human suffering which is often reported from North Korea. Now, Until recently, all the P5 countries were on the same board, that at least they were taking the same position that yes, North Korea should remain under sanctions. It is a threat and it should remain under sanctions. But now Russia has changed its position. As the divide between Russia and Western countries increase, and as North Korea is known to be a close ally of Russia and even China, right? The divisions are clearly being shown at the UN Security Council as well. If you remember, we had discussed in one of the previous classes how North Korea has been supporting Russia in the Ukraine war. How Russia and North Korea have apparently struck a deal where North Korea will supply much needed arms and ammunition to provide for Russian war efforts against Ukraine. And in return, Russia will help the North Korean economy. And it will also give it more diplomatic support. And that's exactly what is happening. Russia has used its veto power to block this resolution, which would have provided for continuation of these sanctions. These sanctions have been there for many years. It was supposed to be renewed, but Russia has blocked it using its veto power. Russia has argued that it's not fair that North Korea is targeted like this. It's been many years since it tested nuclear weapons, and Russia has blamed the sanctions for the crippling economy of North Korea, right? So using this as an excuse, it has refused to renew the sanctions, and it has used the veto to cripple or stop the economic sanctions from the UN. Coming to the last article, it's just a small update regarding AI technology, generative AI technology. There is a new platform which is all set to be launched, and this is from XAI, which is owned by Elon Musk. Given how important generative AI has become, you should know the major players in the generative AI industry. I'm sure all of you are familiar with ChatGPT from OpenAI. Then we have the Gemini platform from Google, which recently underwent a lot of controversies. So there is another third major platform being launched. It's called Grok 1.5 AI chatbot. It's a text-based chatbot similar to ChatGPT. So this is from X, or formerly Twitter. After Elon Musk took over the company, right, there is a separate AI division. XAI is the name of this AI specialization firm, and it's launched this generative AI chatbot called Grok 1.5. Just knowing the names of these popular generative AI platforms can be helpful, and also try and understand the technology behind it. Just read more about LLM model or large language models and how it helps in building these generative text-to-text conversion AI models. So just read a little more about that, take that as a small assignment, and on this note, I would like to end the discussion for today. Please take a look at the practice questions. You can pause the screen, take a screenshot, write it down. It's all based on what we have studied and discussed earlier. So use those points in the same order and structure and write an answer for this and post the answers in the comment section below. On this note, I would like to conclude the session. I hope you guys have liked it. If you did, please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to press the like button and do subscribe to our channel. So that is it for today. I'll see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day.